So for my kinesiology culminating, I'm going to be explaining a soccer shot and kind of how technical and advanced such a simple action like a soccer shot can be. This is me performing just a simple basic soccer shot, and as you can see, there's so many different little movements and muscles that are going into just a little shot just like this. So the first thing I'm going to be talking about is your agonist muscles. So for hip flexion, I'm going to be talking about psoas major, which originates on L1 to L5 and inserts on the lesser trochanter. Next up, I have knee flexion. Our agonist muscle for knee flexion is the semitendinosus. It originates on the ischium and inserts on the medial condyle of the tibia. Up next, we have knee extension. Our agonist muscle for knee extension is the vastus intermedius. It originates on the femur and inserts on the tibia tuberosity. Moving into our antagonist muscles. For hip flexion, my example is the gluteus maximus, which originates on the sacrum and iliac crest and inserts on the greater trochanter. Next up, we've got the antagonist muscle for knee extension. We're looking at the semimembranosus, which originates on the ischium and inserts on the medial condyle of the tibia. For my next example, I've got the antagonist muscle for knee flexion. We're looking at the vastus lateralis, which inserts on the tibia tuberosity and originates on the femur bone. Next, we have a synergist muscle for both knee flexion and hip flexion. So this is the biceps femoris, which inserts on the head of the fibula and originates in the ischium and linea aspera. Up next, we've got the synergist muscle for knee extension, which is the rectus femoris. It originates on the anterior inferior iliac spine and inserts on the tibial tuberosity. Up next, I'm going to be discussing the different planes and axes that this movement takes place around. In the sagittal plane, about the horizontal axis, you can see where a majority of this movement takes place. This is because I'm mainly straight on kicking the ball. But then also, if you look slightly, I am twisting my body towards the end of the movement, meaning that I'm also in the transverse plane about the longitudinal axis. Because I'm rotating my body in the transverse plane about the longitude axis, I'm able to generate a lot more force and power on my kick. Now I'm going to be moving on to bones and joints specifically for hip flexion. In this photo, you can see the ilium, pubis, and the ischium presented. Another bone that articulates during hip flexion is the femur bone, which is a very large, very strong bone. Because of how the femur bone fits into the hip bone, this makes this movement a ball and socket joint. Next up, we're going to be looking at bones that articulate in synovial joints used for knee extension. In this photo, you can see a picture of the tibia, which is a bone in our shins. You can also see a picture of the patella, which is a small bone on the tip of our knee. It also works with the femur bone, which is a very strong bone. This type of joint is a hinge joint. A hinge joint is a very common joint movement in our body, and it allows for us to bend our knees. Next up, we're going to be looking at bones that articulate for knee flexion. In this photo, you can see the femur once again, which is a very strong bone. You can also see the tibia bone, which again is a bone along your shin. You can also see the patella, which is the small bone on the tip of your knee. And you can also see that this movement is again a hinge joint. Now, moving on to Newton's laws of motion, and specifically Newton's first law, which is an object in motion stays in motion unless another force is acting upon it. As you can see, as I kick the ball and it's in motion, and finally, as the goalie hits the ball and causes it to change motion because of the force applied. Another example of this is kicking the ball. The ball is at rest until the force applied of my foot hits the ball and it finally begins to move. Next, moving on to energy systems. As a striker, it's extremely important that I'm very fast and very powerful, meaning that I mostly use my type 2 muscle fibers as a striker. In this next video, you're going to be able to see a very good representation of how, as a striker, I use my ATP PC system. If you can see, I'm in the yellow and I'm heading the ball and overall chasing the ball down to score. And this is ATP PC system because I'm running this hard short distance at a high intensity and I'm using my phosphocreatine in order to score and beat my opponents. In this photo, you can see how well I'm using my glycolysis system. This is a photo of me running up the field with my teammates at a midly high intensity but not super high intensity. This is glycolysis because of the longer distance I'm running and how I'm not at my fully max intensity. In this photo, you can see me and some of my teammates standing and waiting for a free kick in front of our net to happen. We're trying to build a wall. This is my cellular respiration system because of the low intensity I'm doing during my game. That is a very, very good example of when I'm using my cellular respiration system. I'm going to be explaining biomechanical principle number 2, which is maximum force production. To generate the max amount of force, I need to use all possible joint movements and allow each of my joint movements to go through its full range of motion. By doing this, I'm allowing there to be a lot more speed and power on my shot, which gives me a much better chance of scoring. When it comes to being a striker, being strong is very important. This type of training, which is heavy 1-rep maxes, is called neuromuscular capacity. This is not a 1-rep max for me, but this is still a very heavy weight. I am training my type 2 fast twitch muscles as well as my ATP PC system. This allows me to be extremely explosive on the field. Touching in on Newton's laws, this also allows me to have more inertia or more mass than my other players, which allows me, especially in this instance, to be able to put the other goalies on the ground when they run into me. So Ms. Whitburn, I hope that you enjoyed my video, and I'm so thankful to be able to apply my knowledge of what I've learned in this course both on and off the field, and overall try and be the best athlete that I can be. As an athlete, I'm really excited to be able to keep on applying my knowledge, especially in the weight room, of all the different things that I've learned in this kinesiology class. Thank you for watching, Ms. Woodburn, and I really hope that you enjoyed.